Hey 3DMJers, this is Andrea Valdez, and you're listening to the 3D Muscle Journey podcast. You're about to hear Steve Taylor, Jeff Alberts, and Alberto Nunez talk about the importance of eating out at restaurants. Yes, even for bodybuilders, and how we can help ourselves and our athletes do those activities without fear, shame, or derailment from our goals. I'm going to kick it off real quick with a quote from one of Steve's recent articles on the 3DMJ blog titled, "Do you want eating at restaurants to be a part of your life?" As our team's registered dietitian and expert on food behaviors, he laid it out pretty nicely for fat loss clients and athletes, so I'd like to recite his article's intro here. Here we go. If you want to lose weight and keep it off long term, my recommendation is to live the lifestyle you want to live long term while you're going through the process of losing weight so you can develop habits that align with that lifestyle. Do you want eating at restaurants to be a part of your life? If so, I would continue eating at restaurants, strategically obviously, not just whatever, whenever, while you're going through the process of losing weight, rather than trying to completely stop going out to eat and adding it back in once you've reached your weight loss goal. Even though your tracking won't be as accurate and weight loss might be a bit slower, in my opinion, it's well worth it. Outside of the fact that avoiding eating at restaurants for 6+ months is tough, being able to go out and eat and stay on track with your health and fitness goals requires a certain set of skills that can only be learned through practice." End quote. And with that preamble in mind, this episode is going to fill in all the blanks, elaborate on how this might work in contest prep, discuss how and why the team has evolved their stance on this over the past decade, and a whole lot more. I'm going to go ahead and stop talking, but just wanted to give you all that little snip of the article that prompted this particular podcast before you dive in and listen to the rest. As always, if you have any feedback or comments on this episode, head on over to 3dmusclejourney.com or to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/team3dmj and leave it under podcast number 216. Let's get into it. Here's How to Eat Out with Steve Taylor, Alberto Nunez, and Jeff Alberts.
What's your guys' favorite place to eat out?
I just went to Olive Garden, but it's not like the best Italian food because, I'm part Italian, but it's edible. And that's where Ethan likes to eat because we just celebrated his ceremony for graduating a new belt in karate. So he's now a blue-black belt, but he was on the demo team. So it was a big thing, big ordeal. So we went to Olive Garden after that. So I'm a bodybuilder, going to Olive Garden. How am I managing that? And let's just say that I didn't dive into the fettuccine Alfredo just because I know it's pretty creamy. It's going to be high calories. So I went with some soup, a couple of breadsticks, and some salmon. That's what I end up eating there. So not my favorite restaurant, Steve, but it's Ethan's, so I compromised.
Mexicans love their Olive Garden, man. They find any excuse to go out there. Like,
that's not real real Italian food, man.
Shoot, I think, let me see. It's kind of troubling because I live in a landlocked state. So I love sushi. That's like my thing. So there's a place here that's relatively safe so far. So that's probably my favorite place. But if I'm out and about, like in a big city, I like to find those fancy steakhouses where they don't even give you like the side. It's like, you want a potato? That's $13, like that sort of deal. They're definitely worth it, at least to me. Just a good cut of meat. As I've gotten older, like savory matters so much more relative to sweet. So yeah, sushi and steak, those are my go-tos. I'd say ice cream too, a good ice cream shop. Like, every town has their good little one, but I just can't digest that as well as I used to.
What about you, Steve?
I'd either go with Berto and say a nice steak from somewhere, or just like a classic like Red Robin, like burger, fries, and a milkshake. Probably one of those two.
We all eat out still, and we for the most part get stuff done. And I guess that's today's topic is how to have a more inclusive diet, which we're think more than previous years. Like you did your research on this, Steve. Like Steve went back and he's like, bro, y'all said this. We need to, bring it back up to speed a little bit because our guidelines were, I think, they need to be updated. And this is across all goals. So yeah, what do you guys like? How do you guys usually handle that with your athletes when that subject comes up? It's like, hey, I've been hitting my plan up and on point, but I got this thing coming up this weekend, and it's making me a little uneasy.
I mean, for me, I guess I could take that a couple of ways, but basically everyone I work with is trying to develop these long-term habits, and I've just noticed that like a typical approach was like, hey, I'm just gonna like avoid all these foods until I get to my goal, and then once I get my goal, I'm gonna add these foods back in.
Yeah.
The only problem I've seen with that is like, I feel like eating out is a skill. Like being able to go to a restaurant and be surrounded by a bunch of food that looks really good, and not order those things, or not get caught up in the moment, or being able to show up at a restaurant with just the right amount of hunger where we're not too hungry but not too full. I feel like all of that's a skill, and so I'm always trying to like tell people like, hey, like just practice this stuff on the way down. This way, when you kind of get to your goal weight, you're already used to being in those environments. You're already used to making those decisions. You already have all those skill sets built up. So I guess the way I handle it is that's the first thing. Cause I remember like, and I have noticed this and I would even feel this way at times before as well. Like in the past, is like just this feeling of guilt. Anytime I ate out, it's like it was automatically wrong, as if I automatically like it automatically meant failure. And I've just noticed that as a pretty common, like, I guess attitude is like, if I eat out, that means I've already kind of like fallen off my plan, when it like doesn't necessarily have to be like that. So I won't dive into too much stuff, but I mean, just some of the basic stuff that I have people focus on is trying to find that sweet spot between showing up, having maybe saved some calories, but not showing up trying to have saved all the calories. Trying to like basically show up hungry, but no hungrier than hungry. Because again, I've seen it go wrong, where if somebody shows up too hungry because they're like, hey, I have these calories, I'm gonna try to save all these calories. When I get there, I'll be able to have this big meal. The only problem is like, then they show up too hungry. Now it's like, now they're getting the appetizer, they're ordering something they normally wouldn't order, but now it just looks so good. And they're like, well, I got all these calories, and they end up like way overshooting. So just teaching that of like how to get to the restaurant, how to, still be hungry, but not show up too hungry. And then just kind of basically another like good strategy is just ordering like a small side salad with a low calorie dressing as like a starter. And then this way, like you kind of already got those vegetables in your stomach. And then when the meal comes, you've already had some of your veggies. You kind of eat your veggies and protein first, and then whatever you want after that. So I'll stop there and let Jeff and you dive in. But that's some of the stuff that I focus on.
I think the thing I focus on a lot is the understanding of trying to be inclusive, and not like, okay, we're going out to eat and it's this big ordeal where I shouldn't be doing this because it's going against my game plan. I think you get that a lot, as people are just fearful of like eating something out of their normal routine, and something bad is going to happen from that. So, just trying to, prepare them that, hey, let's be inclusive with this. Let's try to manage it the best we can. And even if it's not, let's say, quote unquote, super successful, then there's also the fact that afterwards, how do you react to it? Like, what do we do after that? Do we adjust, or do we just carry on with what we always do? So there should be some prep to it, as far as from a mental perspective of like just getting them to embrace the fact that, okay, you're going to go out to eat, whether it's like, a date night, or, you're going with family or whatever. Like, you don't want to go into it with the fact that this bodybuilding thing is robbing you of like maybe your enjoyment of that life gain that you're about to have. Because I'm sure you guys have experienced this with your athletes. Like, there's just so much anxiety built up around it that they're not fully present when they're there. They're not actually enjoying the people that they're with, because they're just so focused on like how many calories are in this, or I should be eating this or that. So it's just, to me, it's like, I hate seeing people not being able to enjoy life's finer moments. And, even if, let's say, they're a little unsuccessful, they go over, it's not the end of the world, because you still have life after that to try to correct things and steer the ship right, if you will.
Yeah. It reminds me of, we had this German foreign exchange student in high school. And I didn't drink in high school, but all the other kids, it's like they just got pulverized if somehow they managed to get their hands on the stuff. And like I remember for her, she's like, "This is so weird because like in Germany, it's like it's like it's not as much of a forbidden fruit." So she's just like, "Okay, I might have a beer, but like I have no interest on like hanging from a chandelier, like being just absolutely wasted." So with the, like you said, Steve, with the eating, it's like it's a skill. It's like it's gonna be around from here until like the rest of your life. Like you're gonna have social events, and quite often social events, like that is a part of it at least. So you have to take that into consideration, and you want a lot of exposure to that while you are embarking in these like goals that you might have. And I guess it starts with like just how I initially construct a diet, I think, relative to previous years, where it's like, okay, let me find the path of least resistance, like for you. Like what are the small things we can do now so that we build up a great foundation, so that, for the most part, especially with newer folks, it's like a lot of the recompositioning that we want is going to come from the adaptations that take place through like strength training. So like if they're not a breakfast person, it's like, okay, I'm not going to make you a breakfast person. It's like, we're going to use that in a way to like, hey, like leverage that in a way where maybe when we're in a fat loss phase, it can help us have a window in the day where we don't really take in a whole lot of calories. But then, again, there's going to be other things. It's like, hey, maybe Sunday after church, like it's like you and the family always go out to eat. I had this one athlete a few years back that I was impressed. Like him and his bros, like have family dinner. I think it's like a random Wednesday or Thursday, and I'm like, wow, you guys are in your early 20s, and you guys are doing this. Like, this is great. Like, you need to keep up with this. So it's important. Like, that is important. Like, whatever, we all have different frequencies when it comes to that. Like, and yes, maybe for some people who like they come from a background where it's like, hey, like I have takeout like every evening. Like, okay, maybe there's gonna be more things to alter, but you definitely want to keep as much of that in as like what's reasonable. And like anything else, you're just going to like get better over time at like making decisions. And sometimes a decision is like, okay, I'm going to leave some of this food on my plate and tell the server, okay, you can take that. And that might hurt a little bit the first time you do that. Or sometimes it's like, hey, it's like Thanksgiving. Like this food that like grandma makes, I don't get to have like all the time. I am probably going to load myself up with a little bit extra of this because it hardly ever happens realistically. But yeah, teaching them to like navigate like in those sort of environments is highly important. And the people who really grasp this, they're the people who are able to go further when it comes to whatever it is that they want to push. You see less moments in their timeline where there's these big lapses. So yeah, it's a must. And I think what you do with like each person is kind of, it's very dependent on the individual and, what sort of things come up in their life. Right. But it's a must. And having, like Jeff said, it's like an inclusive diet, super, super important because you got to be flexible rather than breakable.
I think it's a good example you brought up of of the alcohol, because the same thing happens with food. Like I've seen where people like kind of build up like, hey, I can't have this food or this type of food because every time I have that food, I binge. But it's like the chicken or the egg thing. It's like you binge on it because you never allow yourself to have it until eventually that craving gets so big that you're just like, F it. Like I'm just going to have it all. And then that only reinforces that belief that I can't have this food. Or if you let yourself have that thing more, and you're open to failing, then eventually you become desensitized to that food in most cases. Not always, in most cases though. And then you can have that food in moderation. Again, there's a lot of context there, but generally speaking, it's possible. But yeah, it was interesting you brought that with alcohol, because it's like it's the same thing with food. Or we were talking off air how some people will think that they have maybe like an intolerance to gluten, but basically they never allow themselves to have gluten until they go out to eat, and when they go out to eat, they have an entire pizza, and now they feel terrible. And this is, again, a kind of, it must be the gluten that's messing me up, where it's like, no, it's that whole massive quantity of everything that you just ate. But again, it kind of, because all the kind of narratives out there and all the information out there about gluten, it reinforces that belief.
Yeah. Where I've seen the eating out really impact my athletes, oddly enough, is going to be during gaining phases, especially, I guess, the folks that get a little bit more of a rush from food relative to others. So usually they come from a background where they were heavier before they started bodybuilding. So there's a lot of resistance anyways to like phases where it's like, you know what, like being in a controlled caloric surplus over time is going to make you look better in the long term. So that's already a hard sell. But what ends up happening is that quite often with their gaining phases, it's not the chronic surplus like throughout the week that necessarily gets them to the point where 3 months from now they're like, you know what, like I've already met my goal weight, like this bulking stuff doesn't work. It's kind of like the gluten. It's like they're like it's the eating out. It's like during those moments they're not able to control themselves or keep their goals in mind. So they end up turning, I don't know, maybe their goal caloric intake is somewhere between 25 and 2,700 calories. But every time they eat out, it just becomes one of those things where it's like, they're 4,000 calorie days. You have that happen, say, twice a week, which especially for young folks, I think there's usually that's I think a pretty normal frequency of like social eating. They go back and they're like, gaining doesn't work for me, obviously, because like look what happened in like 3 months, and it all like what happened here actually was like the majority of our surplus wasn't like smoothed out over the course of time. It was these big blips like that.
Yeah, you see that often where it's like during the week. It was most times like most people, they're Monday through Fridays.
Yeah.
They do the 9 to 5 thing. There's a good routine there, so everything's kind of controlled or semi-controlled, and then you get to the weekend, that's where it ends up kind of being a free-for-all. So if you're in a surplus during the week, and then now you're like an extreme surplus because you're eating out with no control, you're just kind of just not making good decisions, then that's where you see those blips. It's like, oh, this week, there's another pound this week. There's another pound this week because of that.
But that's a skill set you have to work on, is like being able to look at a plate and be like, okay, taking all these variables into consideration, like what might be in there, it's like, let me give it a fair caloric intake.
But that's kind of my story, because like right now I'm kind of maintaining weight pretty well, and this is something I've struggled with in the past when I don't have I'm not prepping. Like that off season is more of the struggle. So the tool that I've kind of like realized for me that works pretty well is like actually having more of a like maybe even a maintenance calories during the week, or even just a very subtle deficit. But the weekend, you can consider them like refeeds. It's not like I'm going crazy and eating whole large pizzas like Steve was saying, because I don't want no GI disruptions. But I'm enjoying my life on the weekends and indulging a little bit, being inclusive, but just not going too crazy. So it ends up kind of balancing itself out. So the weight's up early in the week from the weekends. By the end of the week, it's kind of back down. So in a sense, it's kind of like maintenance. And it's not over the top stressful for me to manage that. But if I had to, like if someone told me, all right, Jeff, I need you to really like refrain from going out to eat as much on the weekends, or I need you to really be like really selective as far as the menu, that's probably going to be like counterproductive for me, because it's going to raise my anxieties. Like, okay, now I feel like I'm being too restricted during the weekend, when that's my family time. Like that's the time where I enjoy my family. So And in the back of my mind, I know like, okay, I don't want to go too crazy because I still have this bodybuilding thing that I'm trying to do. So I've had to learn how to kind of balance these things out. And this is the tool right now anyways, under my context, that seems to be working pretty well. So, and I'm not stressing during the week about even if it is a slight deficit, because in the end, it's really not a deficit when you take a big step back and you look through a bigger picture or a bigger lens.
So I think we're all in agreement that eating out is a part of life, and that no one should feel guilty about eating out, and that especially in the off season, that should be your time to experiment with playing around with eating out even more. That's the time to develop those skills and to, like you said, Jeff, like chill with your family, and like that's when you should be the least concerned about it.
Yeah. But at the same time, like you still have to, like even on the weekend, I still have some strategies because, you know, it's like, okay, because most of the time we're either going out to lunch or dinner. It's never breakfast. So I know, okay, and I never know where we're going to go out to eat. So, you know, sometimes you can go to a restaurant like, oh, there's a lot of variety here. I can make some really good decisions, you know, eat some good tasty food, but it's not high in calories. Or you might be stuck. Like I've gotten stuck in, let's say, some Mexican restaurants where it's like, oh shit, this menu, it's like everything is pretty greasy and oily. So what am I going to do here? So strategy wise, I'm like, okay, let me just eat a little bit on the lighter side, you know, in the morning time, but not overly light where I'm like starving. Then by the time I do get to that restaurant, I'm like, screw it. I'm so hungry. I don't care. So there's some strategies that I've incorporated that's kind of had me be a little bit more successful, you know, as of late versus let's say in my past where it would kind of been the opposite. It would have been like, I don't really care regardless because I'm off season, you know, just the mentality has shifted. And also, you know, I have to think about like overall health too, not just from a bodybuilding perspective, like an aesthetic perspective. It's like, do I really want to eat, you know, all these foods that are like high in saturated fat every single weekend? So that kind of shifted my perspective too, because I am getting a little bit older. So I'm like, okay, I got to think about my overall health as well.
How about you, Alberto? Do you have any strategies that you use when you eat out as a way to maybe limit calories and still enjoy the meal?
See,
If I go out to eat with Berto, like if he takes me to some restaurant, I'm probably not even going to eat, man, because his palate's like way out there in comparison to mine. He'd be having me eating sardines and stuff like that. So
I've never taken you to a sardine restaurant.
so it actually,
imagine that.
It actually starved, man.
I mean, see, you know, what's happened at this point is that I guess I do it so frequently that there's a wide array of tools, and you know, it's like you don't even realize you're doing it. You know, it's like, oh, you know, this time I'm compromising. I really don't like this restaurant, so I would just make sure that I eat a little. Like if anything, I would just not. I probably won't get much, so just continue eating for the most part as I usually do. Because when I get there, you know, I people gonna hate me for this, but the Mongolian grill thing, like I don't like. It's like, why am I cooking my own food? You know, like I get that. It just doesn't work for me. So yeah, if I don't like the food, I usually take this strategy. But you know, it's like you figure yourself out. Like for me, whenever I am trying to, maybe I'm deep in the fat loss side of things. Like if anything, what works better is probably eating a little bit more, like coming in feeling not hungry, because maybe like right now, like, or like the specific goal of like getting on stage in a few weeks matters to me more than like say even sushi. So it's like, okay, what I'll do is I'll have a meal like I usually do, maybe like 2 hours before, and by the time I get there, you know, it'll probably be like a 400 or 500 calorie meal, but like that's worth it to me, you know. And then there's other times, like say deep in the off season, or actually almost whenever, outside of a few situations where like you have to learn to be like, you know, like fuck it, like I'm gonna, this food here is amazing, the appetizer here is good, you know, they have, I don't know, this risotto that I really like, and their desserts are usually like fantastic. So I'm gonna go through all three of those things, you know. And I think that's important as well, to just be like, hey, this bodybuilding thing here, like I'm gonna put this off just to the side for a sec, because at the end of the day, it's like if you are very consistent, you know, like say you're averaging 3,000 calories like throughout most of the month, if you have a 4,500 calorie day, like that's barely gonna bump up the average if you really want to get down there and like crunch these numbers. So it's like your chronic behavior that dictates that. And the majority of my food comes from my fridge. So learning to have like a fuck it moment and like be okay with that, I think is really, really, really important. And then what ends up happening is that, okay, you've taken this food off this pedestal, so you legit, like, you enjoy it, but you don't make yourself like miserable either. Like there's something that I remind my athletes of, especially the ones that are maybe coming off these periods where they've been overly restrictive when it comes to like these sort of things, is like the law of diminishing returns, right? Where it's like, hey, that cheesecake you like from X place, first bite's the best bite, because I think we've all been in those like diet phases where you're afraid that taking a bite of something is going to like ruin like the total outcome. And you're like, no, I'm not going to take a bite out of that because like I have this diet. And I remember thinking to those times where I'm like, I have my little menu here. I'd love to just have a bite or a sample of this, but I can't, because I'd be breaking that diet. And even then, I kind of understood that in a way. It's like that all I need is that one bite. That one bite's like the best thing. And so anyhow, yeah, when you think about it from that perspective, that is like, hey, that fried chicken, whatever it might be, it's like that first bite is the best bite, and then from there, it's like second bite not quite as good, and then here comes a bronze medal bite, and so on and so on. And what ends up happening is you're just, when you think of it that way, you're just more aware of what you're doing in regards to like this meal, in regards to like the normal like satiety levels that you usually eat at that seem to make sense for you, and like where you might be in whatever goal you might be working on at the time. So it's just so broad, Steve. But like, how it goes is like, you can go to a shitty gym now, like you're on the road somewhere, and you're like, all right, I'm gonna make this work somehow. Like, I'm gonna make this work somehow. And it's the same thing with like we can surprise you with a big meal today at like 5 p.m. And it's like, all right, but you gotta go in today, and like you'd be able to make that work out somehow. So, yeah, the more you practice it, the broader your tool belt gets, and you can handle most everything eventually, but you got to practice it. That's like anything else. That's how you get good.
I think that's such a great point, that like once this really becomes a lifestyle, you realize that one big meal or two big meals a month is really nothing. And like, once you've given yourself the freedom to be able to eat out, now like food no longer has this power. And so you can choose to go to a restaurant and not eat, or choose there and go, like you were talking about, go there, have just a little bit of something, because it's not like this is your moment to eat out. But like, I don't know, once this thing really becomes a lifestyle, all of a sudden, like, you don't feel the guilt around it. And once you trust yourself with these different foods as well, once you know you can handle eating this food, and you're not going to go crazy, or it just, I don't know, just when all those things start coming together, it's like, then you can just be in any setting and you can make the call based on the context. Like, hey, is this food worth it? Cool. I'm just about to have 4,000 calories today. Is this food not worth it? Okay, then I'm just going to have this like diet soda and chill, because I can go out to eat tomorrow if I want to. And like, but you said to get to that place takes a lot of practice, and like a lot of like, I don't know, I've just noticed like it does take that, because I had a mindset when I got stuck tracking. Like, for me to finally get away from tracking, I had to be in the mindset of like, I have to be okay with like regressing. I have to be okay with like gaining body fat too quickly, or I have to be okay with like not making progress for a while. And it wasn't until I was like in the mindset of like, I have to be okay with backsliding, that I was actually willing to try getting away from tracking. And I feel like eating out is the same kind of thing. Like, you have to be in the mindset where you're willing to trial and error and not make progress for a while.
That's empowering though. Like, when you're going trial and error, I think like, so that's the mindset. Like, we think like, okay, if we do this, we're doing something bad. But my question is, are you really regressing? Like, even if you have a day where you go 4,000 or 5,000 and your normal is 3,000, like, sure, maybe acutely you're like, okay, I'm bloated or whatnot. But if you're looking at it from that perspective, yeah, you're failing. But if you take a big step back, like Berto was saying, okay, for the month, you're averaging, I don't know, for a week, what? It's 4 meals a day times that's 28 times 4. So like close to 120 meals a month. And if you're having 4 meals, maybe 5, 6, 7, where it's like 4,000 calories, like, is that really going to put you over the edge? And then you also have to factor in, like, your activity levels are probably up and down as well throughout the entirety of the month. So, we can do all this math and do it on paper, but in the end, it's probably not going to do a whole heck of a lot. And by going through the experiences of like, okay, I just ate out every single week, I went 1,000 over, 1,500, whatever. And even if you did, let's say, gain a little bit of weight, well, now you're empowered because you have this data, you have this experience. How do I adapt now? Like, moving ahead, what do I need to do to maybe not have, in the end, like these overages? So maybe it's like adapting a strategy like I have, or maybe it's something totally different where in the end, the big picture kind of is okay. But I
Steve,
think
in your case, you know what? Sorry, Jeff, but what that reminds me of is like, because we've already made our squats like a bunch of times, where you're like, man, it's like, okay, 3 plates wasn't really 3 plates. It's almost like the body comp that you had, Steve, was like, okay, yeah, like I got this body comp, but it's like beyond my skill set right now, right? It's almost like you're like, let me go back, pick up this. Like it's worth taking weight off the bar for a minute because this is gonna let me go way further. And now you've probably gotten to the point where it's like whatever body comp you were rocking, where you were kind of afraid of like, like losing that to like, go back and rewire yourself a bit, you could probably get yourself there now without necessarily like thinking. So it was like, okay, one step back so that like I could get back to 3 plates, and like those 3 plates are like, I'm actually like doing it right. So it's like going back and brushing up on some basic things that like I think the macro counting did for like all of us at some point. It's like okay, it's like, yeah, I know how to. If I have a scale and I'm in my own house, like I can make things happen. But like if I'm not, I'm just so dependent on that to get a desired outcome. So like in your case, like it's like it was worth it because I mean, look at you now, dude. You could probably push yourself to like the leanest you've ever been without like necessarily tracking it all.
Definitely. Yeah, and I think it's a good comparison.
Hey 3DMJers, this is Andrea Valdez here to tell you all about the Recovery Diet, our newly updated free course in the 3DMJ Vault. The post-contest window is one of the most problematic and emotionally difficult times for any competitive bodybuilder. And our coaches have established a system to help athletes get to the other side of that phase in a healthy and productive manner as quickly as possible. This Recovery Diet course was made by our Chief Science Officer, Eric Helms, and he'll be showing you exactly how we execute this framework to get athletes back into their gaining phases with minimal damage or delays. It's a short and sweet delivery of 14 videos with Eric explaining the research and recommendations for the recovery diet, and also includes a downloadable PDF summary guide for quick reference throughout the whole process. It's one of the 5 free courses that we have in the 3DMJ Vault, including BFR training, gaining strength while cutting, and sustainable fat loss. And if you want access to all 16 of our video courses, you can become a VIP member to get access to every single one of them for just $12.99 per month or $69.99 per year. VIP members will also get the Advanced Deload Guide, the Calculating Your Calories course, the Lifting Library, our Contest Prep Q&A collection, the Lagging Body Parts course, and many more. Go to 3dmjvault.com and sign yourself up today. That's 3dmjvault.com to get all access. Thanks so much for listening and enjoy the rest of the show.
First contest prep, like I got lean. I'm like, it's just, it felt like it was just way out of line with like my basic habits and just like eating skill set. And especially when I started to track, it was one of those things where it's like, it was one of the better things for me because it made me understand like the value of like $1, but like I guess like a calorie, right? But at the same time, it left me kind of screwed up in that, like, man, I don't know exactly what is the 3-number breakdown for this burrito that I want to have really bad. And I can't enjoy this like as much as I'd like. And I mean, now it's to the point where I think if I wanted to, I could get myself to have like lines in my booty and have a burrito every week if I actually wanted it that bad. But again, since I've been eating out like literally every week this prep, like it's like when it happens, it's just it's no big deal at all. Like compared to like when I was a rehabbing macronator.
What strategy are you using to incorporate that?
The eating out.
Yep.
Whatever she wants to eat usually is what I go with. And for me, what works well is like if I just don't plan for it, and it's like, like I'll adjust either afterwards or no, there is no strategy. It's just like, all right, throw me in the situation and like I'll figure it out. And if like I really want the burger and fries,
it probably depends on where you're at though. Like you kind of, because of your experience level, you kind of know, okay, this is what the foods are on this menu. These are about the because you've tracked in the past for, all this experience. So you kind of know more or less like, looking at this size of this burrito and what's inside this burrito, I have a good idea what the calories are on this.
Yeah, well, like everything, like in bodybuilding, life kind of comes and goes anyways. It's like 1 minute you're shredded and like you're 20% body fat, and so it's like I don't miss the shreds when they're gone, and when I'm 20% body fat, it's like it's not a big deal because eventually we cycle back downwards. So it's the same thing with food in a way. It's like when you have that like outlook, it's like it almost feels no different than when I'm sitting here with like my bowl of cherries and like some top sirloin that like I specifically bought and I prepared. It's no different, and honestly, like you've mentioned, Jeff, like what matters the most is that like someone else is cooking this food for us. That's why I can't do Mongolian grill stuff, right? And we're sitting here and just like relaxing and enjoying breaking bread together, and like that is like first, second, third, to the point where sometimes I'm like, oh, my food's cold, because you're like bullshitting. Where it wasn't that way when like I was trying to, I guess, like look for trouble and like start eating out a little bit more because I'm like, this is seriously like a skill set that I need. It wasn't that way. The way it started was like me basically leaving the restaurant like, oh boy, like we could have done that a little bit better in so many ways, but that's how you learn. But yeah, since it comes and goes, Jeff, like it's like, hey, maybe like this is really tasty, but just knowing that, not that I'm not even trying to do it on purpose anymore. It's just like, this is not going to be my last meal out. This is not going to be my last meal. There'll be more periods like ahead of me where I'm like so overfed to the point where it's like I hate bodybuilding right now. It almost, it's like on autopilot. Like it's like with the posing with you, Jeff, like it's not there yet. Like I see you get up and like you just hit your side relax and it's just like a reaction. Like you don't think about it, like making you think about it would probably fuck you up. So with the eating out, it's kind of like that at this point where it's like, I don't even realize that I'm doing, but I'm like that actually makes sense in the grand scheme of things. But you get there by practicing, like being aware.
I was just gonna say, so yeah. that's where my question is stemming from. Like if someone's kind of listening to us right now and they're like, well, how did you get to that point? Like, what's your strategy? And that's just it. It takes exposure. You have to expose yourself to those situations. Yeah. I remember when I first started learning how to practice my posing, like I would literally record myself and rewatch it over and over and over again and just keep practicing and practicing and practicing. And like anything else, it just turns into like, you just don't think about it. It's like brushing your teeth.
My RDL, Jeff, I was so bad at that forever. And like now, like what helps me is like just walk that thing out fast and do it. And everything falls in place, whereas I had like 8 different cues and strategies like to start, like all these voices. And I'm sure that's what it feels like.
You're overthinking it. You're overthinking it because you're fearful of jacking it up. Mm-hmm. Right? Like you're just thinking about it. You're fearful of jacking it up instead of just like, you know what? Like anything else in life, if you don't know how to do something, you're not going to know how to do it tomorrow. You got to practice it.
We've all been at the table.
You have to embrace
everyone's talking, enjoying it, like their food, and you're just here like trying to like, okay, what does this mean? What is like you're not even enjoying your food, even though you're about to like pig out like you really love it. And now it's like we just do our thing, Jeff. We just go there, show up, and again, generally make the right decisions. And we almost couldn't tell you how, except that it was a process to get there.
Yeah, it's almost you have to start with embracing the fact that you're not going to be perfect. Like embrace imperfections because that's how you get better. That's how you get self-mastery, is by going through the process over and over and over again. So, I mean, you can go to In-N-Out like 5 times in a row and order the same thing and get the same results. It's like, well, maybe instead of getting like 4 patties, let me just get 1 this time around, you know? Yeah. So it could just be as simple as that. But you have to be willing to like put yourself into the fire. And I think that's where people are fearful, and from the get-go. Like I was in that camp back in my 20s, like when I was prepping a lot, like I didn't go out to eat at all. And I would basically just tell my ex-wife, like, I'm not going. And it would be a fight, you know? It's like, you can go and just have, like, she would even say, just go and have a Diet Coke. And I'm like, I don't even want to be in that environment because there's just too much temptation. And I'm going to be moody and grumpy and no one's going to want to be around me like that. So it's just a terrible mentality to have. A lot of it's like fear-based. Like, okay, if I eat whatever's at the restaurant, it's going to jack up my gains. I wouldn't do that in the off season. I was a little bit, you know, in the off season was off season, but like for contest prep, that's how it was. And if I did go, maybe it was bringing a Tupperware. I mean, that's old school. Like people bringing Tupperware into restaurants, or even like telling the waitress, like, make sure that chicken breast is like ultra dry, you know, just really. And of course, like, you know, half the time, if you get a waitress that is like, man, this guy's like trying to be so special, like probably telling the chef, like, put some extra oil on that for this guy, you know? So, yeah, I think it's just a matter of like I said, from the get-go, like the mentality of like trying to be inclusive and giving yourself that empowerment to actually expose yourself, because that's where you're going to learn the most, is actually by going through this. And like I said, after the fact, it's like, okay, yeah, I ended up eating too many pieces of pizza. Like, okay, next time I'm going to go into it with a different mentality. Like, okay, I don't need to eat a whole pizza. I can eat a couple pieces of pizza and be okay with it. You know, I never understood fine dining. I was like, man, like they give you this little tiny little steak. They give you like a quarter of a potato and like 2 string beans. And you're like, shit, I'm going to come out of here starving. But it's about the taste, the experience, not stuffing yourself.
The quality of it all, you know.
Exactly,
right?
The quality. It's kind of like the training, right? Like, let's do a squat correctly. Let's not do a bunch of shitty ass reps. Like, let's make sure the quality is like super top notch. And it's actually the company that you're with, like sharing it with. That's like, so to me, like going to Olive Garden, it wasn't about like, I'm going to go eat fettuccine Alfredo with like 10 breadsticks and just come out of there just stuffed, and it's all you can eat soup and breadsticks. So I'm just going to just shove it all down my throat because it's there. It was more about like celebrating Ethan's graduation, you know, getting a new belt and just experiencing that. So again, it's probably not the best food, Olive Garden, but it wasn't that bad.
It's related, but it's a small pivot. If you guys do have somebody who, and I guess there's going to be a lot of context around it. If you do have somebody who goes out to eat and they do end up, let's say, eating way more than they intended, and it puts them over for their calories, what do you guys have them do? I know my approach is typically just, hey, just forget about it, move on. In terms of the next day, if you genuinely aren't hungry, go ahead and have a little less, but don't intentionally restrict yourself. Mm-hmm. If you are hungry, just eat like normal. If you're genuinely not, then go ahead and have a little less. That's my typical go-to. What do you guys do in that situation?
I like that because, you know, again, it's like handing them over. It's like a little bit of autonomy like there as well, where it's like, hey, you know, if you want to have breakfast, have breakfast. If you just want to have a protein shake, have a protein shake. You know, totally up to you. But it's not making what they definitely perceive as a mistake is like a bigger deal than it actually is. You know, it's like what really is going to get us the results more than anything is like what you're going to do like chronically over like the next few weeks and months. And it really highlights that because quite often they'll be like, I'm willing to do this, this, and that. And it's like, no, that usually turns into something quite negative, you know.
It just creates that binge, restrict, binge, restrict, binge, restrict. And now it becomes, they made a mountain out of a molehill versus like, yeah.
I mean,
how about you, Jeff?
I see it the same way. Like if someone like they have a real bad overage and then the next day you say, all right, man, we got to cut your calories in half. It's almost like you're telling them in so many ways, you jacked up, you did something bad. So there goes those guilt feelings right there from the top. And not to mention, I mean, depending on the context, because there's, I mean, obviously there's gaining phases, there's contest prep, you know, depending on levels of leanness. So if someone's like extremely lean, you know, now all of a sudden you're slashing their calories way down, or hey, I need you to do a bunch of cardio as well. Like, it's going to create that cycle. So hunger, like the next day, your hunger levels can be pretty extreme. So it might lead to even more overages. So personal story for me was I was about 8 or 9 days away from my pro debut, and probably Alberto maybe remembers this. I had a pretty bad binge. And I remember the next day, of course, you have the guilt feelings like, oh shit, you know, I'm 8 or 9 days away from my pro debut. Why'd I do that? I screwed up. But I mean, I didn't sulk in that too long. I kind of just told myself it is what it is. It happened. How do I, you know, get better moving ahead? And I just told myself, okay, just get back on the horse and keep moving forward. Don't try to do damage control or anything like that. Don't have a pity party. And I just got back on normal protocols, and it just carried on. If anything, I mean, because I was well fed. My training was actually pretty good the next couple of days. But, you know, a week later, heading into the show, actually hit new lows, had great conditioning, and I did pretty well. So I kind of learned from that, like, okay, you know, it seems bad in the moment, but again, you take that big step back, like I talked about earlier, and there's a lot more to the story than just what you're doing in the moment. So to me, it's like, I think trying to like counter that, like trying to clean things up, or, you know, try to do damage control is probably the worst thing that you can do, because the behaviors are extreme, right? Like you go from one end to the other as far as behaviors. You got, okay, one day you're eating way over, and then the next day you're eating way under. So the behaviors around that are very erratic. So you want to like get them more towards the middle, like even ground, the consistency, and work on strategy to prevent, you know, the extremism.
And I'll tell you what, it gets easier once you start to accumulate some good things like via bodybuilding, because, you know, for most people, they're still kind of in transition. Like they still haven't achieved the things they want to achieve. So sometimes, because I know a lot of what we've talked about so far has been like, hey, you know, it's okay. Well, it's a little bit more on that side of things, you know, but I know that for me, like right now prepping, like even on those days where it's like, I'm a little hungry, you know, what, that dessert looks really good. Like, because I've, accumulated like enough things on the physique side. Like sometimes like, hey, you know, like I'll make a little sacrifice when it comes to, you know, like stopping at like maybe a third of the dessert as opposed to like the, you know, my half or the whole thing, because I've accomplished enough things when it comes to like my personal goals, when it comes to bodybuilding. So it becomes a lot easier over time, because there will be times where it's like, okay, like this is definitely a somewhat abbreviated version of what I would like to do in this moment. And it just gets easier over time, like to make those acute sacrifices, because you've seen some things progress from, you know, because, hey, there's a lot of sacrificing that goes into this sport. And that's why we want to kind of control the amount of like restriction and agony that someone has to go through to like get there in a, you know, in a healthy, sustainable way. So I know that like whenever I do have to make those decisions where it's like, all right, today it's like you get like 3 pieces of sushi and like 1 sushi roll, where it's like, you know, maybe 10 weeks ago you could probably do like 30-40% more food. Like I certainly would like that, but because, you know, I've had a few small wins along the way, you know, like it's a lot easier to like make those calls. Like usually when people get really good at this is like during the weight stable periods they go through, where it's like, okay, we have a physique now that like, hey, you're pretty proud of for like the first time ever. And like what you will see is that making it happen in those sometimes unpredictable environments, they have a little bit more success, simply because they're like, hey, you know, like it feels pretty good to, you know, for the most part, look the way I envisioned myself looking like. So it gets easier. It just gets easier as like, you know, you've gotten a few things off your bodybuilding to-do list.
Since you both prep athletes, generally speaking, if you know somebody's in the middle of a prep and you as coaches and they're talking about eating out, what is your stance on eating out during a prep? And I know there's a lot of context behind that, but I'm just thinking like, so because there's going to be a lot of people in prep who are just trying to navigate, especially your athletes. You're like, hey, what does this mean now? Do I just get to eat out? Like what does that line look like? Or what is your recommendations during prep?
Man, that's so context dependent. That is so context dependent. Cause like you have to look at like how skilled the athlete is. Like, you know, they're advanced bodybuilder, they're intermediate, they're beginner. What phase of prep are we in? You know, so if we have a beginner and it's closer to a show, I might be a little less, I'm probably a little more reluctant, I should say, to like give them free reign to eat out, let's say once a week. Because we can always eat out after the show's over. If they're someone like Alberto and he says, "Hey Jeff, I'm gonna eat out once a week," then I don't stress over it because I know he has a skill set to manage it and still make progress. But yeah, that is, and even like you could like here's the thing too is like you could even have someone who's pretty advanced, but let's say they're not a very good communicator, you know. So it's like, as a coach, you don't always see what people are doing behind closed doors, you know? So I think as long as I'm seeing like progress throughout the prep and they've been, you know, inclusive with eating out, they're making progress, I don't worry too much. But if the progress is a little sketchy and I'm unsure, and let's say the data could be a little bit better, then I might be a little more willing to say, okay, we're going to be a little more rigid, you know, maybe the last month or something like that, or the last couple of weeks heading into the prep. So it's just kind of depends on a lot of variables, because not everybody's good communicators, you know. Even myself, like sometimes I can be very quiet and not, you know, be willing to just like dish out all kinds of information. So as a coach, you know, sometimes you have to ask a lot of questions to try to get as much data as you can to get that confidence to either, hey, yeah, it's okay to eat out, you know, frequently, or no, we need to pull back.
See, for me, the prerequisites for prepping just keep getting higher and higher because, first of all, there's a subgroup of people that feel that in order to get the physique they want, like that's what they have to do. When like that's how you get the physique. You know, like that's the stage is part of it. When like most competitors will tell you that it's like, no, it's something that I have to do in order to like, you know, find success within the sport. But to be honest, I probably like my physique with like, you know, like an extra like 13 pounds on it. Like that's probably like the outfit I like the most personally, you know? And again, like they probably at this point are taking into consideration like what they look like in clothes as well, because, you know, most of the time we have clothes on, like how much different or better usually training is, things like that. So who I like to compete these days, I think it matters a lot more. Like there's a lot of times I'm like, you know what, I think before we do this, I think what is best is like we have to go back and like we have to like master these things, because I do want to get it to the point where, you know, if you are prepping now, because that is an extreme goal, like this is nothing almost, you know, like this is like you have that under control. You know, but again, with that said, you will have competitors that they probably seems like they have met all the criteria before they started prep, but prep is just so different. Like, you know, you can kind of envision like what you're going to react like to things like on the way there, but it's one thing to kind of understand the concepts of like what are reasonable actions, like if this takes place, that takes place. It's a whole different thing to actually like be in a body that's like undergoing like that level of stress, especially your first time. So it does happen where it's like, man, this guy was like very dependable, and he not just like to me, but like to himself, like when he was in the off season, but like now it's like, whoa, like this is getting to be there's a lot of white knuckling at this point. You do have to make calls that kind of, like Jeff said, it kind of just depends on the person, and like we might have to rehearse certain situations that like them in their right mind, like it would be nothing, you know. And I know that like them with like 12 pounds on them, like they'd make all the right calls. Like this fried chicken place that, you know, like he has to go to, like is not a big deal. But But I think compared to previous years, it's like we're a little bit more open when it comes to that. And I think that's just because, again, we prepare our athletes a lot better than maybe we did 10 years ago, where it was like, hey, like, let's just not do this at all. And I can go back and I'm like, man, we're kind of wrong, because they were trying to emulate athletes that did get a lot of their basic fundamentals in order, and that's why they were doing it. And I think the way we should have at least explained that to these newer athletes is like, well, you know, they've been doing this for a minute, and you know, there's all these moving parts that come with, like, you know, that burrito. In this case, it was Matt Ogus. They were trying to be like,
I was gonna say,
you know, and
it was like
Matt.
Our whole roster all of a sudden is eating Chipotle. I'm like, oh dear Lord, like some of these people should not be eating out as much as they should be, because they didn't have this skill set. So yeah, like Roberto was kind of saying, we didn't really explain too well like why we shouldn't be eating out right now based on
we didn't
X and X
appreciate
context.
How good Matt was. Like, he understood. Like, I remember at some point he said, as I get leaner and I look more jacked, and I keep going to the same spot, like, they just keep giving me bigger and bigger portions. And he's like, and it's like just something I have to take into consideration now. So it's like, wow, like, that's like, in hindsight, it's like, dude, you're making our job harder. But like, that was admirable in a way. Like, it's like,
he had his own context down, you know, and he it's his own data, because he's
it
like,
was just
okay,
a
I
flinch,
go there
it was
all
just
the
a
time.
reaction.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
he didn't even think about it, you know? Yeah.
Yeah. And I think what you said about like making it a prerequisite, you know what? It's a good idea, because if you think about eating out, like the culture, like most people go out to eat, and your significant others, your family, like you're going to be a hermit throughout the entirety of a prep. And, you know, now the standards of conditioning nowadays, it's crazy, and it takes longer to get in that type conditioning. So that means your prep's even longer. That means your social dynamic is changed for that period of time. So to say, okay, I'm not going to eat out, or I'm going to have anxieties around it, like that's a long time to be living that way. So, and I've seen as a coach too, like relationships suffer because of the athlete's anxieties around eating out. And I don't think that's talked about enough, to be honest with you. And, you know, I had one athlete in particular that were about 2 weeks out from the show. And this particular athlete, I think maybe only went out just a couple occasions, like special occasions, like, you know, anniversary, birthday, that type of thing. But we're talking like a, you know, 9, 10, 11-month ordeal here, where this person's only going out to eat once or twice, maybe 3 times at most. That puts a lot of burden on relationships and family. So like 2 weeks out before the show, I'm like, okay, if they're not willing to expose themselves to going out to eat, then I'm gonna basically take them out to eat. And that's what I did. We ended up going out to eat, ordered off the menu. What I thought was going to be grilled chicken ended up being like deep fried chicken with rice, vegetables. And this person was like very reluctant to eat the chicken. And we're 2 weeks out from a show. In back of my mind, I'm like, okay, nothing's going to happen from eating this chicken, because all we have to do, if needed, is just lower calories down later on in the day or something like that. It's just pretty easy. But for them, it was like a big ordeal. The anxiety levels were just crazy high. So, I mean, it's not like I forced them to eat it, but I really encouraged it. And and that's what ended up happening was ate the meal. And of course, the next morning, you know, you go to take the shirt off. Okay, what we looking like? And it's like, okay, we still look like we did yesterday. We're still pretty shredded. We're pretty peeled. So nothing bad happened from it, but it's actually just getting that person in that environment and exposing to it to try to kind of break through. Because, you know, as a coach, if you're taking someone through a prep, which is like you said, Berto, it's pretty extreme. You know, you're transforming your body, you're changing like social dynamics, you're impacting the people around you. Like, it's important to, you know, have these skills to be able to balance out prep in life and be able to have a meal out with, you know, your better half without having anxiety around it and worrying about, you know, okay, I'm going to destroy my physique or anything like that. And you're not fully present, you know, when you're like that. Yeah, like you can try to be, but you're not fully present there. If you're thinking about like bodybuilding through that whole dinner, like, are you truly engaged in like real conversation with people? So to me, it's like super important that we do develop these skills as far as eating out with contest prep. And even with like, even if you're not prepping, you're just like, a recreational bodybuilder who's trying to transform their physique. I think it's important to have these skills. I'm sure you could speak to that, Steve, because you work with more recreational people.
Yeah. No, and that's kind of what sparked me, I guess, wanting to have this conversation is it was just kind of the mindset of like, a lot of people's like, if I ever eat out, it's a failure automatically. And then just trying to bring it back to that longer term picture of like, hey, like, is your plan literally to never eat out again? Or because like realistically, that's not even realistic when you think, because like you're gonna move, you're gonna travel, like things are gonna happen. We're gonna need to have that skill set. So yeah, I think just that getting in that mindset of eating out is a part of life. And that it requires a certain set of skills, like we've talked about this whole podcast, and that those skills take practice to develop. But yeah, just kind of, I don't know. And like you guys were saying, like, depending, there's a lot of context around when somebody's in a prep, whether how much you let them eat out and things like that, where if anything, that gives more credence to practicing in the off season. This way, when prep comes around, they'll be in a better position where they can eat out more frequently and still stay on track.
Well, I think even if you want to be that dude that's like super, like, I won't break, I'm the exception, I can like prep like this forever. Like the people who are the least flexible, who are the least dynamic at the end, those are the hardest peakers, because something always goes off, not according to plan, like come peak week, usually at the show, right? Like those are the people whose insides are just like spinning at like 100 miles per hour. And it's like, you just somehow spilled yourself over just like through all these stress responses that are like going on. And it's so it's important. It is important that like I don't think you've mastered bodybuilding if the little things like this that seem like they don't matter. If you haven't done that, it's like you're never going to be the ultimate version of yourself, which is crazy that it's like this is tied in with like having, I don't know, like dinner dates with your significant other, or being able to enjoy a wedding. I don't know, but yeah.
And I would
go. I was gonna say, how many times have you guys seen, whether it's contest preppers or not, like how many times do you guys see who's just like, oh, I have this hardcore mentality, I'm just gonna be super restricted, and I'm gonna be hardcore about it, and then once that goal's done, like then they really go out to eat. It's like, now I'm going to like have a pizza every single night. So I did that like for like 4 or 5 days after a show back in the early 2000s. I was hitting Little Caesars up every night and having a large pizza on top of all my normal foods that I eat post show. So I was gaining like 15, 20 pounds in a week. And then again, the extreme behaviors, it's just huge swings. So you guys have probably seen that as well.
You could only hide so many things underneath your bed, man. Like that's like legit what that is. You know?
Peanut butter jar, the peanut butter jar.
Well, like I mean, in a metaphorical sense, it's like I'm just like putting this baggage away. I'll deal with this later, and then like you found out, Jeff, like it all comes out, as opposed to like, hey, let me do something with you that's like reasonable, you know, right?
Yeah, I didn't eat at restaurants the entire prep, but now all of a sudden the first week I've eaten at like 20 different restaurants. For each meal I'm having a restaurant, and now the calories are like way up there.
And that's where it's like, hopefully, because that again fuels like why somebody might not trust themselves to go out to eat, is because it ends up being they're going along and finally they just like crack and then they spiral off. Well, if somebody can actually start to make the transition before they crack, that's ideal, because then they're choosing to go out to eat and make these decisions and work on these skills, versus now just like all of a sudden just like doing it out of total reactionary and almost not even by choice, but just because they can't control it anymore. Or if it's a choice and they're choosing to do it, it feels a lot better.
I think we've covered a lot.
Yeah.
No, final thoughts,
Jeffrey?
I would just say be inclusive. Be inclusive, give yourself some exposure, be okay with like making some mistakes here and there, but try to learn from them and, make adaptations so you get better. Like Berto said, just like your squat, keep practicing. It'll get better over time.
Yeah, you might have to redo that thing. I think everyone has to redo their squat at a certain point, right? It's like, that wasn't really your weight. But I think, there's so much more to bodybuilding outside of like, hey, what are my specific like macros to get this goal done? To what is my MRV? There's all these other subtle things that you need to work on, and as soon as you identify them, it's like get on them. It's like, even if you suck at it, like the best part about sucking at something is that you make some newbie gains, like as you're picking up that skill, and before you know it, like there's certain things I've done during my prep right now. I'm currently in prep that like me 12 years ago would have been like that's insane that you can do that, and that it doesn't make you feel a certain way, and that you're still getting what you want out of your physique. So yeah, as soon as you identify a gap in your skill set, get to work. It's going to be hard. You're going to mess up a little bit, but it's totally going to be worth it at the end. And I think all of us here can like now say that we can keep a pretty reasonable like body comp, and we can make it do this if we want to. We can make it do that if we want to, without like necessarily thinking too much about it, to the point where we're almost like looking for like new things within this space to like master. Like I want to do a prep next time without a body weight scale. I think that would be that would do me a lot of good. I think that would enhance the experience and my trust in myself. So yeah, as soon as you find something, get after it. And for a lot of people, it just happens to be that reservations make them nervous.
Yeah. And I think the only thing I would add to that is if someone's in a position where they can't eat food that they haven't made, kind of like we've hinted at this whole podcast, is like, have they really mastered their nutrition? Have they really mastered their eating habits? If that big piece is missing, and a lot of it does come down to like the trust side of stuff. I don't know. I think about sustainability all the time. It's just like, is it really a sustainable diet if you have to avoid this entire chunk of life to do it?
Too often there's parallels with like bodybuilding and art, and it's like, you're not even an artist. You're just like freaking tracing. Like it's tracing paper. Like that's all it really is. So
let's
don't
not trace.
Learn
don't
to draw.
trace and go make a reservation.
Yeah. You get better.
What's going on, 3MJers? Eric Helms here. Thanks for listening to our podcast. I just want to take a second to tell you about MASS, Monthly Applications in Strength Sport. This is a monthly research review that I put out with Greg Nuckols, Dr. Mike Zerdos, and Dr. Eric Trexler. We cover the most up-to-date, peer-reviewed research in the world of strength and physique sport that's directly relevant to your practice as a coach or athlete. We provide our reviews in written format, but also, since you enjoy our podcast, audio roundtable reviews where we discuss the research in depth. Finally, we also do video concept reviews where we cover a broader topic in video format for your learning. For fitness professionals, you can take quizzes on MASS content and earn continuing education credits in most of the biggest certifying bodies in the fitness industry. If you want to sign up and get a subscription, head over to 3dmusclejourney.com and click on the Products tab. Thank you for your time, and thank you for listening.